Welcome to the Bitcoin Source Podcast, the ultimate destination for all things Bitcoin. Today we have one of our favorite Bitcoiners on today, Jimmy Song, for a second go around. Jimmy is the author of Fiat Ruins Everything: How Our Financial System is Rigged and How Bitcoin Fixes It. Jimmy's book offers a compelling analysis of our modern world's challenges and the potential of Bitcoin to address them. Welcome, Jimmy.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on again.
So Jimmy, let's get into your book. So your book Fiat Ruins Everything delves into the debasement of various systems in our society, from banking to
Hmm.
education. Could you provide an overview of the key issues you highlight in the book and explain how these systems have deteriorated over time?
Yeah, so if you think about the role of money in society, it's a part of everything, right? All the transactions that you do, how you pay your rent, how you pay for your food, how you get paid at work, and so on. All of those things have money at the center. And when you corrupt the money, unsurprising, everything else sort of corrupts along with it. And that's essentially the premise of this book, is that fiat really does ruin a lot of things because it's the mechanism of fiat money, the central banking that's in the middle of all of our transactions. It essentially corrupts all of these transactions and changes the incentives in ways that we don't really recognize. And the book is organized into six separate parts, and multiple chapters in each part. But the first section is making the moral case that fiat money is evil. The second section is incentives at the individual level, the lack of savings vehicles and so on. The third part is at the company level, the work that you do, the giant corporations that we have now. These are all sort of like artifacts of the fiat monetary system. And then part four is about the nation state level and all the incentives that go wrong there. And then the final one, or part five, is about the global level incentives. These are how the world is structured and the incentives for various countries because we are under a dollar hegemony. And finally, I make the case that all coins and fiat money are all sort of like trying to make Bitcoin sound scary or make it seem outdated or something like that, but that you shouldn't really get distracted. So, yeah, that's sort of an overview of the various themes, and you can see that it goes sort of from a very um, person, like very micro all the way up to the very macro.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm really happy because you've written so many different books, and I've always wanted to ask you, like, is this book different in the sense of like your drive, your passion? Because I feel like right now the market is kind of down. People are being
Mm.
more quiet, and I always find that like writers, this is a perfect time for people to kind of push out the education because it's weird, like people aren't paying attention, but if you're a real Bitcoiner, this is like the time that you're really digging in and studying before the halving, before the big price markup, when everybody comes in and they're an expert at Bitcoin. So like this book, like compared to Mastering Bitcoin and some of the other ones, like has this been kind of like a process for you where you're able to take your time, slow down a little bit, and better synopsis for this book versus some of your other ones?
Well, I wrote this book, I guess, in the bear market a little bit because it's aimed at a different audience. All my other books are generally trying to draw people in from the outside. So, programming Bitcoin, that was for developers, so they could get to know the Bitcoin protocol. The little Bitcoin book that made sort of a human rights case for Bitcoin, and that was for people that were interested in human rights and different developing world perspectives and trying to get them into Bitcoin that way. Thank God for Bitcoin, that was aimed at Christians and getting them into Bitcoin. Bitcoin and the American Dream, people that were more politically active, let's say, to get them to understand Bitcoin a little better. This one is different because it's aimed squarely at other Bitcoiners. I wanted to write a book to sort of rally the troops because, as you said, during a bear market, it is very easy to kind of get this distracted, or maybe even a little depressed at the price going down and so on. And I wanted to make the case that, you know, the system that we're in, the incentives of the system are really evil, and it really does ruin a lot of things that otherwise would be going much better if we just sort of have a freer market with sounder money. And instead, we have all of this corruption, and I'm trying to expose it so that people in Bitcoin can be more convicted, and know that this is the right way to go.
Yes, and to piggyback off of what you were saying, Jimmy, Bitcoin is presented as a solution to the problems caused by fiat currency and
Mhm.
centralized systems. How does Bitcoin offer a viable alternative to these issues you discuss in your book? Because, people have their qualms. People say, well, Bitcoin is supposed to be this solution, but look at the price. A
Mhm.
lot of people that aren't really savvy to this protocol, well, the first thing they say is price. The first thing they say is, oh, well, why hasn't the ETF been approved? Why hasn't this?
Mhm.
Why hasn't that? So, like, in your book, like, why is this a potential game changer, and why did you highlight that in the book compared to some other alternative ways to, store your wealth or to free yourself from tyranny?
Which one's the best crypto asset? Well, Bitcoin's the best crypto asset. Okay, what's the second best? There is no second best. There's no second best crypto asset. There's a crypto asset. It's called Bitcoin, right? Right? There's no second best, okay? But take all your money, buy Bitcoin, then take all your time, figure out how to borrow more money to buy more Bitcoin, then take all your time and figure out what you can sell to buy Bitcoin. And if you absolutely love the thing that you don't want to sell it, go mortgage your house and buy Bitcoin with it. And if you've got a business that you love because your family works for the business, it's in your family for 37 years, and you can't bear to sell it, mortgage it, finance it, and convert the proceeds into the hardest money on earth, which is Bitcoin.
This channel is for education purposes only and is not affiliated with any financial institution. This is not financial advice. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now back to the episode.
Yeah, the thing about all these other forms of wealth is that they're still part of the fiat system, and that's the thing that a lot of people don't really have a good grasp of. So the traditional stores of value are real estate and stocks, and both of them have been manipulated heavily by fiat money. The availability of mortgages means that there's loans available whenever you want to buy a house, assuming you have sufficient credit or whatever. And therefore, the housing market gets completely distorted. One of the reasons why, housing is such a big issue is because it has this store of value premium. So instead of housing going to people that need houses to live, it goes towards people that want housing to invest. So one random statistic I heard recently is that New York City has like the top end condos, right? The places that where everyone wants to live, like they're like 60% vacant. And the reason is because it's a great investment. So rich people buy those things, and instead of it going towards people that could use it, right? Like that maybe work in the city or whatever. It's not even people that live there. It's like foreign nationals that are buying it because they want to store value. So you get distortions like that all over the place. And I don't need to get into the other store of value like stocks and different equities and stuff like that. But those are heavily manipulated too. It's not, the PE ratios are all out of whack and things like that because there's a store of value premium to these things. So when we talk about Bitcoin fixing some of this stuff, what you need to fix the evils of fiat is another system completely. And the premise of this book, and the reason why I called it Fiat Ruins Everything instead of Bitcoin Fixes This, is that oftentimes the removal of something is way more powerful than the addition of something. And you might have seen this in your daily habits or something. If you're trying to pick up a new habit, right? Like somebody says, you know what, like it's really awesome if you exercise every day. Well, it turns out that that could be good, but if you're like drinking and passing out from, you know, alcohol every night or something like that, removing that is probably going to do way more for you than starting the exercise, right? And that's how things are with Bitcoin. Oftentimes, Bitcoin is amazing and it does a lot of stuff. Don't get me wrong, but oftentimes the benefits that we get from Bitcoin are simply the removal of fiat. It's kind of like changing your diet, where you know you might have been eating a lot of sugar, for example, and then you know you change your diet to be keto or something. The benefits of keto aren't I mean, meat is nutritious, eggs are nutritious, you know, all the things that you would eat on keto are probably very nutritious. But the cutting out of sugar, the cutting out of processed foods, that's what really gets you the benefit. So once you recognize the evil of fiat, you know, the benefits of Bitcoin, like it's doubly compounded, because not only are you getting the better incentives of Bitcoin, but you're removing the really bad incentives of fiat money, and that's really at the heart of why Bitcoin is just so beneficial, because you're able to escape the system.
Yep, yep, I agree with that 100%. And you know, they always say never judge a book by its cover, but I just think that the cover of your book is so fire, and it, you know, like the Benjamin Franklin, like that's kind of, if you're in the know, that's really highlighting
Mhm.
the banking system as a central focus in your book. And you
Mm,
know, how does like the fiat monetary system perpetuate the problems of fractional reserve banking and debt-based
mm,
money? And you know,
mm.
I know that you've gone over this numerous amounts of times, but how can Bitcoin address these fundamental flaws? Because when you see Benjamin Franklin, the average Joe, the average American, the average Canadian or European, when they see that, they just assume that that is the most powerful currency in the world. It's one of the highest denominations of our US dollar system. So, like, putting a clown face on that Benjamin Franklin is really telling for a Bitcoiner. So, could you expound on that, Jimmy?
Yeah, yeah, and I love the cover. And you know, to be clear, I didn't design it. It was my editors at Bitcoin Magazine hired somebody, and that person came up with this concept of turning the Benjamin Franklin on the $100 bill into a clown. And you know, it kind of gets into this whole clown world meme and things like that. And I love it for that reason. To answer your question with regard to banking and how it just sort of absolutely dominates, I get into a lot of that in the book, but let's just sort of unpack that a little bit, because at the individual level, you're dominated by debt, right? Like rich people, they don't carry lots of cash. That's not how rich people are. If you know anyone rich, what they do is they get large amounts of loans against the assets that they hold. So if you have you know, a $10 million property, you borrow against that $10 million property. You don't sell it and get cash and do stuff with it. No, you just borrow against it, use that money, and you know, you're essentially levering up on whatever assets that you might have. Um, and if you're poor, you take out like very high interest debt. That's actually like a better gauge of like how rich you are in a fiat world, is what kind of access to debt do you have? Because if you're an orphan in North Korea, you have no access to that. You have zero. You can't borrow anything. You have to live hand to mouth, and you have to carry cash around or whatever. But you know, if you're you know a poor person in the U.S., you at least have access to maybe even payday loans or you know credit cards or and things like that. As you go up the ladder, you know, a middle class person probably has access to a conforming mortgage or something like that, and those are reasonably priced, right? Like they're what, like right now 6%, 7%, something like that. But if you're really rich, then that's when you get, like, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you can get I read about how he got like a 1.5% mortgage on his house, and he didn't buy like a small house either, obviously, but he gets access to just tremendous amounts of loans because he's very rich. And I imagine anyone up there kind of has access to that. That's at the individual level, right? Like it distorts everything because it's not about the value you're creating anymore. It's about your ability to tap into this banking system and get lots of debt because all of the money is debt. It's all debt. And if you have more access to that, you have more money. At the company level, what happens is that you get a lot of small companies that have to operate kind of like poor people do, right? Like they don't really have much access to debt. I mean, you get access to some small business administration loan or something like that, but vast majority of small businesses they're having to use cash, right? Whatever savings or whatever. But if you're a large company, if you're over $1 billion, and that tends to be like a big sort of like demarcation point, and this is why like VCs call them unicorns and so on. After you pass that $1 billion mark, you have a lot of advantages because you have access to the commercial bond market. And that means that you can get loans essentially from banks that are printed out of nothing. So you can use that money to underprice your competition, the small businesses, or more sort of like charitably, you can scale up and reduce the per unit price of your goods and services. Or you can just use that money to go acquire like smaller businesses that might have better ideas, right? And go bring all of that in-house. Or more cynically, you can eliminate competition that way. And this is indeed what's happened to pretty much every industry in the United States. You look at food, it's like 4 or 5 agricultural conglomerates, right, that control food production. And then you got 5 companies that do food distribution. Healthcare, there's 5 or 6 insurance companies. Accounting, there's like 4 accounting companies. This is what happens when you have this giant money advantage. Well, like you're going to use it, and that it centralizes everything because nobody else is going to be able to compete. And even at the nation state level, the government gets to print whatever money that they need. They don't need to have revenue for the money that you spend. Like, most people, they have to at least take in some amount that's reasonably correlated to the amount that they spend. Maybe you go into debt a little bit, but that you're going to have to pay that off. You can't keep playing this Ponzi game. Government, they can play this Ponzi game, right? Like they had like a budget of 6 trillion and tax revenues of 4 trillion. They just printed the other 2 trillion to do whatever they wanted. So government has horrible incentives. And even at the global level, we're under a dollar hegemony. The US dollar is the global reserve currency of the world. And that means that the US has undue influence over every other country in the world. And this is why the US ends up in conflicts that are nowhere near our borders, right? Like somehow in the last 60 years, we've been in Vietnam, we've been in Iraq, we've been in Afghanistan, we've been in Ukraine. Like these are literally on the other side of the globe. And somehow we've been involved in all of them. Why? Because of the dollar hegemony, right? We are sort of like an implied third party in every conflict because we're the third party in every economic transaction because the dollar is the reserve currency. So it's getting out of that and unrolling all of the systems that are in place right now. That's the hope for Bitcoin because in many ways, the current system is horribly unjust, not just to the people in the U.S., although it certainly is. It's really the global South, the developing countries, the people in Lebanon or Turkey or Venezuela or Argentina that are really suffering.
Yes, and you definitely expounded on talking about the issues that the US dollar causes abroad, but I want to talk about things that are closer to home that are more relatable to people, which is real estate. We're
Mm,
traditionally taught go to school, go to university, get a degree, get a decent job, and then put
mm,
yourselves into this amounting, enormous amount of debt for 30 years called a mortgage.
mm,
And, real estate is an area of concern that you talk about in your book. So,
mm,
how does, the fiat system contribute to the issues like the housing bubble, where you talk about
mm,
people getting crushed, or, for example, like you said, billionaires getting certain incentives to buy real estate at a cheap interest rate? How does the
mm.
wealth inequality and how can Bitcoin's characteristics kind of mitigate some of those problems?
Yeah, and this is like has been sort of like a persistent thing because essentially the government has put emphasis on housing ownership, and instead of it making it better, it's made it much worse because they've essentially created this whole mortgage industrial complex where people are able to get fairly low rate loans. And that sounds good, right? Because, oh, now I can afford it. Except, like, that's not how the market works. As soon as you provide that facility, now the cost of that thing goes up. And, it's a similar dynamic that happens with like college loans. Oh, okay, I don't have money to go to college. Well, okay, we'll provide these loan facilities. Now the cost of tuition just goes up. Oh, I don't have money to go get healthcare. Well, we'll provide these insurance facilities. Now the cost of healthcare goes up. Wherever like government intends to try to help people, it almost always ends up making it much worse because you get a giant bureaucracy that ends up rent seeking, and those costs get rolled into the price that you and I pay. And mortgages are no exception, right? Because of the ubiquity of mortgages, housing prices have gone through the roof. It's outpaced CPI certainly, but like way more than that. In many ways, it's kept up pretty much with the monetary expansion. But it's one of those things that continues to go up, and most people put down 20% or less, which means that they are essentially leveraging, right? Like you're getting 5x leverage on your money, and you're hoping that it doesn't go down so that you can be made whole, which seems to be kind of precarious right now. But that's the problem. It's not about your savings anymore. It's about your debt or your access to debt that determines the size of the house that you get. And this is being used, by Wall Street at this point. So I don't know if you've heard, but BlackRock, for example, is buying up lots of real estate. Vanguard is buying up lots of real estate. Bill Gates is buying up lots of real estate. And they're not doing it from cash. They're going and getting loans and essentially leveraging the money that they have. And they're not getting like 5x leverage that you and I get. No, they're getting probably 20, 30, 100x on their loans. This is the dirty secret of investment banking and hedge funds and all of that. They are way richer than you, so they can leverage way more than you. And that's really the definition of being rich in a fiat economy, is your ability to leverage. So they're using housing, or they're buying up some stock of housing because they know that there's going to be a demand. And ultimately what that means is that people that need housing don't get it. I mentioned before, a lot of apartments in New York City, some of the best ones, sit vacant because they're being used as a store of value. But think about like just more practically, like if you wanted to have a big family, for example, right? Like if you wanted to have like kid number 4 or 5 or 6, you're going to need a bigger house. Well, to go and try to buy one of those houses is going to be significantly more expensive than a house that houses 2 kids. So instead, this is probably one of the reasons why birth rates are going down. You're literally making it you're disincentivizing having kids because housing is going towards investors and not towards people that are actually going to use it. And these are the market distortions that kind of happen as a result of the intervention of, you know, the central bank and government.
Yes, definitely. That was like, phew, man, that's like, preaching to the choir right there as far as people really trying to build families and, enjoy the fruits of their labor. And just to have the housing prices be so astronomical, it's like insane. So, folks out there, grab this book and really listen to what Jimmy's saying, because it's not only Jimmy that's saying this. There's people all over the globe saying the same thing, but it kind of hits home when you have such a thought leader in the space as Jimmy Song is in the Bitcoin space writing this book. I know I'm definitely sold. I need to get a signed copy of this book and put it on my bookshelf as a part of my collection. So, Jimmy, thank you for, just breaking that down. But, I got a few more things I definitely want to dig into here. So your book, it really has this potential to fix the systematic issues like we've been discussing right now. Have you kind of looked into any case studies that illustrate how Bitcoin is already making some of these positive changes, or was this just kind of something that you just have from experience and just connecting with people across the globe about Bitcoin?
Yeah, I am not aware of any sort of systematic studies of like Bitcoiners versus non-Bitcoiners or anything like that. But I think anecdotally, and I think you'll agree, you'll see that Bitcoiners generally have lower time preference than people in the fiat world, and it's honestly like as simple as looking at the money, because with fiat money, you are incentivized to spend because saving is so difficult. If you are going to invest in real estate, I mean, think about how difficult that is, right? You have to go and, first of all, find the property, then do an inspection, then close and pay the real estate agents like 5 or 6% or whatever it is. And then you have to maintain it and do all that. Like, if you're trying to keep up with the monetary expansion, with the inflation that's going on, it's a lot of work. You have to work to keep your money, and this is not an unknown thing. In fact, pretty much the more wealth you have, the harder you have to work just to keep your wealth. And if you talk to any rich people, for example, this is all they think about. They are constantly looking at how to preserve their wealth, basically, right? You talk to them and they're like, yeah, I'm getting in on this deal, and I'm putting it on this mutual fund, or I'm looking at this stock or whatever. That's all they think about, because they have to. Otherwise, their wealth gets sort of destroyed away from them. And it's unfortunate because some of these people, assuming they're not rent seekers, provided a lot of value to the economy in order to get that rich, right? Like they provided a good or service that other people found valuable. And they're having to work to just preserve the money that they made rather than bringing new goods and services into the economy. You're essentially taxing their productivity, taxing the value that they can add to civilization. And that's really bad, right? Because like these are some of the most entrepreneurial people, the people that can add the most. I find it especially sad, for example, that a lot of people that start successful companies, they retire right into being like venture investors or angel investors. Really, they're just trying to preserve their money, right? Like, and that's what they're doing. That happens to be the world that they know. So they end up, essentially working very hard to try to find the right deals to get into and stuff like that. So that ultimately means that instead of doing all of that work, people will consume, will spend, and get into debt. And this is really bad for the character of people, because if you are consuming first, right, if you bring consumption forward through debt and you just spend, well, what happens at the other end of that debt? Well, you have to pay that off. And you're essentially enslaved to that debt because you have to go and do something about that debt. And that is sort of the backwards way of doing things, because that doesn't improve character at all. In fact, it will make you bitter. It will make you envious. It will bubble up all of the really bad parts of your heart, basically, instead of the good stuff. Because who likes being enslaved to anything? It sucks. But the right way, under sound money, you don't have this ubiquitous access to debt, and instead you save, right? And that is good for your character. If you save, and then you finally get what you want, that is extremely satisfying. And it changes you along the way, because you have to have that discipline to not spend the savings that you have towards that goal. And I think that was how civilization was built. Saifedean talks about in his new book, Principles of Economics, capital formation, right? If you save, you have all of this capital that you can deploy for better goods and services. This is how society gets built, because you need longer time frames to become more efficient on a per unit basis, right? So, for example, if you try to catch fish with your hands, you're not going to be able to catch very many. Maybe you catch like one or two in a day, and that's maybe enough to feed you for that day. If you spend a week and build a fishing pole, right, a good, decent fishing pole, now you can catch like 5 or 6 a day, and you're way more productive. And if you spend like a month building a boat, well, now you can go out to the deeper water where the bigger fish are, and you can get maybe like 20 or 30 a day. And you can spend even longer and build an even bigger boat and use like traps and bait and things like that. And next thing you know, you get what you have today. You have fishing vessels that get like 100 tons of fish in like 3 weeks with a crew of 12, right? On a per person basis, it is enormously efficient. But to build one of these vessels, right, these fishing boats that go out into the cold Arctic water with these giant heavy fishing traps and bait and all the machinery and everything else, it takes like 5 years to build one of those things, right? The amount of time it takes to like build anything that is efficient, that does bring prosperity, it's a long slog, and it's mimicked by the act of saving. And in fact, it is a form of saving, and that's what builds civilization. And that's good for you, right? It makes you a better person, because you have to have discipline to do all of that. And you're actually providing value to others, making people happy. I suspect that the epidemic levels of depression that we see in society today is because you're not really contributing anything. Like a lot of these people, a lot of jobs, really, they're rent seeking. They're not providing anything. You're really extracting resources from the rest of civilization. I guarantee if you're building something that people find useful, and not like, I don't know, trading monkey JPEGs or something like that, like if you're providing something that people want, you're not going to have problems on that front, because you're making other people like happy and appreciate the things that you're doing. And that's I think the thing that we've been getting away from with fiat money, is that everything is just kind of getting debased, and people are getting used to rent seeking and breaking down civilization. You're essentially eating the seed corn of civilization, and not like building it up. And Bitcoin takes us to a place where we can start building again.
Yes, and not to get biblical here, but there's always that saying that everyone thought Noah was crazy until it started raining. And it's one of those things where you see like on the mainstream media now, people are asking like, hey, do you invest in Bitcoin? And then there's
Hmm.
tons of people that have these stories that say they bought some, the price went down, they sold it, they don't believe in it, it's too unstable, but they invest in the stock market or they invest in real
Hmm.
estate. And because of all of these things, I think that kind of alters the opinion of the average Joe that's never been onboarded into Bitcoin. So because of these changes, Jimmy, has the way that you approach educating people on Bitcoin, has that changed?
Yeah. It's definitely changed over the years. So, at the beginning, I would try to get them interested by maybe sending them a little bit of Bitcoin or something like that. And I remember hearing about Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase. So every single person that he met, he would give one Bitcoin to. This was back when Bitcoin was a few dollars, so it wasn't that much money. But he would every single person that he met, this what he would do. Somebody even showed me the actual. They still had the same wallet, and they showed me the one Bitcoin that Brian sent, and it's like it's still in his wallet. Kind of crazy. That doesn't work, right? Like sending people money, that doesn't work. I've sent a lot of people money. They usually forget about it, that they don't understand what it's for, and so on. Another tactic was sort of like talking about, all these places you can spend Bitcoin there, right? Back in 2015 or so, there was like Expedia and Dell and there was even like an online retailer, and that took Bitcoin. Doesn't make a difference. That doesn't get people interested. Um, really wasn't until like 2018 or so that I hit upon the fact that most people, like, they don't know about Bitcoin enough. The people that are actually in Bitcoin, the Bitcoin maximalists or whatever, they took some time to really study it. And in fact, it takes a few years usually for most people to really get it. And that it's you need to understand what money is. You need to understand the problems with the current system, and assign the proper blame for the societal ills that result from the fiat system, to fiat and not to corporate greed or some other BS that the mainstream media tells you. Um, and once you really understand that, the economics of it, and understand it as better money, then you really get it, right? Like then you're really on board. But if you see it as, that went up 50%, in the past year, I'm gonna buy some of it because maybe it'll go up again. Like that doesn't get people in. And this is where I disagree with a lot of the quote unquote Bitcoin moderates on Twitter, who are like, oh, a lot of people get in through altcoins. No, not really. The people that get in through altcoins, they're degenerate gamblers. And to the extent that you see people coming into Bitcoin from altcoins, it's because they got burned, and they really went down the rabbit hole after they get severely burned on altcoins, and then they're like, okay, I get it now. The thing that people need is to seriously study Bitcoin, and as I said, it takes a few years. There's several people, and there's some extraordinary people that manage to avoid a lot of that and get into it in a few months. The three people I can think of are Russell Kung, Nayib Bukele, and Michael Saylor. Like they all just sort of got into Bitcoin and got it, and it took them a few months of real study to get there. For most people, though, it's going to take a few years. So the tactic that I've come towards now is, just asking them about money and helping them understand what money is. And once they understand the injustices of the fiat monetary system, then it's a lot easier to convince them, hey, like, Bitcoin is actually the real alternative to this corrupt system.
And your book, Fiat Ruins Everything, is pretty much a solo mission. And I know that you've
Mhm.
collaborated with other people in the past, Bitcoin and the American Dream. I
Hmm.
think that collaboration in the Bitcoin community is vital. How do you see the role of partnerships and collective efforts in advancing Bitcoin's mission to improve the financial systems you've discussed?
Yeah, so we have a community, and that's always a good start because, in a sense, fiat money has destroyed communities, and I argue this in the corporate chapter because, in a sense, we used to be organized into tribes, families, clans, whatever you want to call it. We're now organized into companies, right? You're identified by where you work, right? That's the first question you usually ask somebody is, oh, what do you do for work? Where do you work? Which is essentially asking what cog piece are you in what machine? Because these corporations are not anything like a family or a clan or a tribe or any of these more ancient sort of groupings that we had. The corporation couldn't care less about you. In fact, like if they can make money by firing you, they would. They've just made it kind of difficult to fire people and so on. But they don't care about you, right? And it's kind of this sociopathic kind of organization anyway. But they do provide a lot of stuff like healthcare and your salary and things like that. But part of what gets destroyed in that transition from families and tribes to a company is that you miss a lot of connections, like people that you trust and so on. And that's really unfortunate because that's a large part of what it means to be human, is to be connected to other people and to have a community. We're starting to bring that back in Bitcoin. I think people are way more cognizant of the importance of family, probably because a lot of them don't have fiat jobs anymore. But being in a community is extremely important. And it was sort of like the main resource that you had. And if it wasn't for government providing a lot of these safety nets and so on, that's where we would be dependent, right? Like if you lost a job, right, or if you didn't have any work or something devastating happened to you, like who covered for you in the past? It wasn't the government, it was your family, right? Like, okay. And if you needed like a referral to figure out like who to go to if you had some sort of sickness, it was your family. And if something happened to your house, who did you turn to? It was your family. That was the normal way of being. And this has been subverted by fiat money. But as we go towards a Bitcoin standard, I think you bring a lot of that back. And people stop working in these giant corporations and instead provide goods and services directly to the market. And if you are doing that, you're going to need, and you're successful, you're going to need more workers. Well, where do you draw workers from? Your family. Like that was how people used to do it. It's okay. Yeah, I'm going to make sure that my son understands how to, be a blacksmith. If you were a blacksmith, right? Like that was, and it's nice because, that's your family. You already implicitly trust them. You don't have to go through all of the weird stuff that like any corporation makes you go through about sexual harassment or weird cringy things that you like, because you already trust them. Like that was how these things were built. Like businesses were essentially family affairs. Now businesses are completely fiat affairs, and that I think will become way more important as we go forward. Now, with respect to the book and collaborating and things like that, yeah, I think there will be more of it. There's already a community that's kind of growing, and we try to support each other and stuff like that. Yeah, I can't wait for that to become more of a prominent thing, and hopefully people see the low time preference behavior in some obvious way through those connections.
So, looking ahead, what are your aspirations for the impact of Fiat Ruins Everything and the broader understanding of how Bitcoin can create this positive change in the world, do you think that this book will kind of bolster you into more of the thrones of legacy in the Bitcoin world? Or do you think that this is kind of a book that the people that already get it will get it better? Or is this going to onboard some new people to Bitcoin that's never experienced this before?
Yeah, it's always difficult to know how your book will impact people. So, after I wrote Thank God for Bitcoin, I was extremely surprised when Saifedean Ammous, practicing Muslim, asked me for a copy. I was like, I had no idea you would be in that audience. But and other people that were atheist or Jewish or whatever, they wanted a copy of the book. Why? Well, they wanted to know the moral argument and so on. So did not write it for them at all, but somehow it ended up in their hands. So it's hard to tell exactly where it will go. Here's where I hope it will go. I hope it will influence Bitcoiners to understand that fiat is really evil, get them stronger diamond hands, I guess, and not like sort of despairing when you enter into bear markets like we're in now, and help them to really articulate the argument that a lot of the societal ills that we have are because of fiat money. And hopefully, if they can make that case to a lot of their friends and family, maybe you can get them on that arc. I don't know. That's the hope I have for this book. I mean, I don't know if this will be like a top bestseller or anything like that. I just wanted to write something that Bitcoiners would find valuable, and hopefully it does.
Thank you, Jimmy, man. You're a legend in my book. So even if the book doesn't sell well, like I'll have a copy, I'll pass it around to everybody I know. And I think people need to get into the understanding that the world is changing at a rapacious rate and everything is going digital. Look at the CBDCs that are coming out. Look at the way that the infrastructure is kind of failing us. So Bitcoin is definitely the solution. Even if people don't believe it, they think it's a Ponzi, they think it's not a real currency. They're going to quickly find out that things are going to change very fast and they might have to learn the hard way. So reading and educating yourself as much as you can on this protocol from experts in the field like yourself are going to be crucial for people in the future. So thank you, Jimmy, for this conversation. It has been awesome.
For having me. It was great.